Hi there, and welcome everyone today to Effective Advocacy and Lobbying Your Elected Officials. This is Julia Watts with the American Sustainable Business Council, and I want to touch on just a few housekeeping items before we jump into our presentation today. We're together for about an hour, and you will have the option to ask questions at the end of this presentation. You're welcome to either type your questions through our online webinar portal, or we will unmute lines toward the end of the call. Please note that they are muted at the moment to prevent feedback. And with that, let's dig in. So for folks who may not know, the American Sustainable Business Council is a national network of PPP bottom line businesses. And we advocate on behalf of our members on three important policy issues: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic development. We represent over 200,000 businesses nationwide, 80 business organizations spanning routine Ben and Jerry's. Much of our work in advancing the issues that we care about revolves around advocacy at the federal level. We also advocate in state capitals and in municipalities across the nation. We do this by placing op-eds, issuing policy statements or issue briefs, placing earned media across the country in both local and national publications. And what we have found to be powerful and effective is using our business leaders as spokespeople to the media on issues, and especially bringing our business leaders to DC and to state capitals to lobby Congress and the administration. So I assure you that this next slide is very boring. This is my bio. The thing to take away here is that I lead our economic sustainability portfolio, and much of my job is preparing our business leaders to be effective spokespeople when lobbying congressional officials or state and local officials. So how to take their message directly to policymakers. Well, before we get into the how of effective advocacy, I think it's important that we touch base on the why. Why advocate? In the current political context, many of the issues that we care about are under threat. And whether for you that's climate change, access to affordable health care, or the bottom line issues that you're invested in to make sure that your front doors stay open, we strongly believe that business leaders have the most credible voice, particularly when we're talking on a national level. How many of you have heard, come election cycle, the political ad talking about small businesses as the engine of our economy, or business leaders as job creators? And while these are sometimes cliche, there is real truth to them, and the power of the business voice cannot be underestimated. We think it's essential that the businesses that are part of political and policy debates are responsible businesses, businesses invested in sustainability, and not just the businesses that folks may think of, big businesses represented by the Chamber of Commerce, for instance. And then a DC truism here: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Folks who've heard this before, I think, know that it's true. If you're not part of the conversation, if you're not setting the stakes, you're next in line. So with that, let's talk a little bit about how a business leader can advocate effectively. Now, what we're going to run through here is essentially true whatever level of government you're talking about. If you're taking your message to the mayor, to your senator, to your governor, these are the how-tos of conducting a lobby visit. So what is a lobby visit? A lot of back and forth on where the term actually originates from, but my favorite story is that it came from President Grant when he frequented the Willard Hotel, referring to political advocates who would essentially loiter in the lobby trying to get access to him. And thus we have lobbyists in the act of lobbying. So let's talk a little bit about the sequence of an effective lobby visit and how to do that, again, at whatever level of government you're most interested in. First and foremost, and the business leaders on this phone will know, the key to any successful project: clarify your objectives. What do you hope to accomplish with the meeting? What is the specific ask of the policymaker or their representative, perhaps a staffer or another surrogate? And who is the most important office holder to target for that ask? So our recommendation here is to make that ask as narrowly tailored as possible. Keep it specific, keep it short, and make sure that you are targeting the effective person to make that ask of. So of course you need to start by requesting your meeting. You can typically call or email your target office. Many, especially congressional offices these days, will have online forms that you can fill out in advance of a meeting. Now, don't be scared off by these. Filling out the form, it's not a vacuum where you'll put in all your information and never hear back from them. That actually is usually the best practice to get in touch with an office. So go through the whole rigmarole, fill in your information, let them know who else may be in your group, and expect to hear back within a couple of business days. Ask to meet directly with the elected official or the policymaker themselves. If we're talking about a congressional meeting, ask to meet with the member. It may not happen. They may refer you instead to a staffer or a surrogate who could speak more specifically to your issue, but always ask for the person that you really want to meet with. Lead with the top line. Whenever possible, identify yourself as a constituent. People want to hear from the actual folks that live in their district. Essentially, you're making a case for why a policymaker wants to meet with you, why you're worth their time. And the message that, well, hey, I'm going to be voting for you come the next election cycle really gets their attention. After identifying yourself as a constituent when you can, make sure to identify that you're a business leader. Even if you are reaching out based on a personal issue and an interest that may not be a bottom line issue for your business, that stature and standing that comes from leading a business in a policymaker's community is really powerful. So don't forget to add that to your either formal invite or your elevator pitch. Do list the attendees who will be joining you. If you're bringing other staff and colleagues, if you're bringing consumers or other constituents from the district, it's important, mostly just for security reasons, that when you are setting up meetings with people, they have a full roster of who's going to be in the room. And just as a rule of thumb, when you actually get to the meeting, it's always good to remember to bring a photo ID. You will almost certainly be asked for it. Then finally, set a date and time that works for both you and the member that you're meeting with. And remember that meeting with staff is not necessarily a diss, as it were. Meeting with staff means this is the person who is the subject matter expert in the office on this issue, and they are going to listen to your concerns, have a conversation about the status of whatever the issue is, and then take your feedback directly back to the member. So sometimes it might even be better to meet with a staffer than a member, but don't tell anybody I said that. So then we get to the meeting itself. And I think a good rule of thumb for any successful event or meeting is to prepare thoroughly. Think through your story. You may not be a subject matter expert on a particular policy issue. You know, maybe you don't have a LLM in tax law. That's fine. You are the expert on you and your business. So help them understand why whatever the issue you're discussing matters to you and by extension to them. Do your research on the policymaker's background. Understand before you go in to meet with them, what jurisdiction do they have? What committees do they sit on? And is this an issue that they're going to be voting on in a committee or in the short term? Or is this an issue that they've never touched and you need to really start at the 101 level with them? If they do have a public record on an issue, you know, if they've said complimentary things about your bill, or they voted against it 5 times, they've been in every Congress for the last decade, know that going in. Be armed with the best facts that you can be. Prepare those facts and background material. And while storytelling is probably the most powerful currency we have in making a case to elected officials, it never hurts to include data, particularly if you have data about your business and what it will mean if a particular law goes into effect. Do make sure to identify the specific piece of legislation or measure or rule that you're discussing. Know the number, know who's introduced it. This goes back to our point about wanting to make sure that your ask is narrow and tailored. Have the facts ready when you go in so that you can close strongly. Create a leave behind document. So My rule of thumb is don't leave more than one piece of paper in an office. If you hand them a 100-page research report or your company's annual report, or here are the 3 pieces of paper on 3 different issues that we talked about today, you are decreasing the chance that they're going to actually read it, whether it's the staff person reading it and giving it to their member, or the member taking a look at it before they're rushed off to their next meeting. So keep it concise. And just as a good rule of thumb, if you can take information and make it more graphic, more eye-catching, I think that that's always powerful to help communicate your message. Be sure and research context outside of just where the person or policymaker you're meeting with stands. If there is, there was a big New York Times article the other day about Warren Buffett talking about your issue, make sure that you can point to that and strengthen your argument for why this issue is not only important to you, but is something that the policymaker you're meeting with should support. Show them the momentum behind it and use that to strengthen your argument. And then finally, if you're meeting with a group, again, if you're coming to the Hill with ASBC, or if you're meeting with your mayor, with staff and other colleagues, don't hog the talking time. I find it really helpful to run through how you're going to run the meeting beforehand. I think that's always a good rule of thumb. But if there are several people sitting around the table and you've only got 30 minutes with a congressional staffer, make sure that everyone who needs to gets the word in edgewise. So you've had a dynamite meeting, totally convinced somebody to sign onto your bill. Good job, you. After the meeting, make sure to thank them. Be gracious and appreciative of their time in person, but then set a follow-up date for when they're going to get back to you on whatever your ask was. Realistically, they may not sign on to your issue in the room that day. What they're probably going to say is, I need to get back to you. I need to do some research on, how we're hearing from other constituents. Or again, if this is an issue that they're quite new with, I need to just do some research and figure out the numbers of what this impact to my community is going to be. So make sure that you give them that allowance, that extra time, but be tenacious in following up and reiterating that ask when you can. Do try and get a photo while you're there. It never hurts to help promote your efforts or your brand by pushing out social media about the event through whatever various channels you have available to you. And do remember to send a thank you letter, whether it's a paper letter or an email. Either or both are appropriate depending on the time that you have and your personal preference, but send something. Folks who work, especially in Capitol Hill, are very, very busy, and while they should be meeting with you, you have every right to some of their time. I think they've got a better chance of remembering you and of fostering a healthy relationship with you if you can send that thank you, recognizing the time they took out of their day. And then, of course, beyond the thank you, beyond the follow-up date for the ask, do actually remember to follow up. If that's scheduling another meeting, if that's another email with supporting information that you discussed when you were together, if it's a promise to get together with them when they're back home in their home district, all of that's excellent, but make sure that there is another touch point beyond just this meeting. Don't waste all that good work that you put into it. So sometimes you can't always meet with your official in person, and even if you can be helpful to really hammer a point home by having other touch points beyond just coming to Washington, D.C., for instance. So I want to talk now about some outside advocacy techniques, and the 3 that you see listed here are all really powerful tools that ASBC uses effectively at different times. The first is the idea of participating in a coalition. And spoiler alert, for folks who are ASBC members, you are already a member of a coalition, and we, by extension, are members of many coalitions on issues ranging from paid family leave to climate change and a carbon tax to clean water and everything else in between. The power of speaking with a collective voice on an issue as a coalition member cannot be underestimated. Yes, you as a business leader have an individual story to tell. Now magnify that by 100, by 1,000, and you're really starting to hammer your point home. A second outside-in advocacy technique is this idea of appealing from the grassroots. So simply by virtue of being business leaders, you have a true leadership position in your community. But grassroots appeals are essentially a volume game, getting your staff, consumers, vendors, partners in the community in whatever way to also weigh in on your issue is hugely important and can help to keep up a steady drumbeat of why we, or policymakers rather, should be voting one way or another or acting in a certain way on your issue. The third outside advocacy technique I want to talk about is also a powerful one. This idea of using third-party validators. And these are usually think tanks or independent experts who can, through their sort of independent appeal, bolster your point. You know, a study by a nonpartisan group hopefully will take your issue out of the realm of being Democratic or Republican. Again, it's also a great way just to add legitimacy and expertise in addition to a personal story that you may be telling. So that layering impact of layering data and narrative, or strategic thinking of not just having your voice, but all of these voices, is really what helps us to push forward and effectively advocate for the big policy changes that we care about. So another way to get in touch with your policymaker, to take your message directly to them, even when you can't necessarily in person, is to write letters. It may seem like a simple tool. Certainly, if it's a snail mail letter, it feels like how many of these do I write nowadays? But letter writing is an incredibly powerful tool. Whether it's a letter from a coalition, something you sign on to with ASBC, whether it's a letter from your board of directors, or a petition that you get, again, that grassroots community to sign on to. Letters allow you to lay out your argument perhaps in a more detailed way with some more supporting evidence, and are a great tool to put yourself on the record about a particular issue. Another way to reach your policymaker, through a simple phone call. I cannot underestimate how important it is to pick up the phone and reach out to your elected officials, especially if something is happening in real time, for instance, the healthcare bill. We've seen an incredible groundswell of, I guess, opposition to the recent Republican healthcare bill. And regardless of your particular feelings on that piece of legislation, I think we can all agree that the powerful response from constituents by picking up the phone and dialing in, so much so that some members of Congress had to take their phone lines off and just route people straight to voicemail, essentially, really does have an impact. So don't underestimate the power of picking up the phone, and do leave a message. If you get there and there's no one available to chat with you at the moment, they will get back to you. You can also attend town halls and public events in your home district. So perhaps coming to Washington, D.C. doesn't make sense right now, but even if it's a local elected official, they have an obligation to meet with their constituents. And much of their work is, whether it's getting out and shaking hands on a rope line, or a town hall, or attending a local barbecue, show up to those events. Be present and be prepared if you get a moment with them, even 30 seconds on a rope line, or one question from the audience. Be prepared to talk to your point. And then finally, for folks who are business owners, business leaders, it can be really powerful to invite policymakers to your business. Have them do a site visit. Our friends at a lot of the brewers in our network are that's always a fun tour. So let them come out and see actually what you do, and meet the people you work with, and help them understand in a way that will really stick with them why this issue is going to matter to the great operation that you're showing them. So we also want to talk today about the power of using media to communicate your story and your issue to policymakers. Various channels that we're going to talk about can be incredibly powerful, either as standalone tools, or especially in combination with some of the other tactics we've talked about today. The first I'll mention is social media. If you have social media channels available to you, whether they're your personal channels or especially your business channels, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what have you, make sure that you're sending this information out across those channels. So if you've written a letter, don't just send it to Congress, socialize it. If you had a meeting and you took that picture, wonderful. Push that out through your social network. Make sure that you're using social media, which is hopefully a relatively low lift, to amplify your message whenever possible. The next opportunity I want to talk about is earned media, which Pew Research has shown us is really the most respected form of media. This is the third-party word of mouth where you've earned this opinion, so people are more inclined to trust you than if you're just saying it yourself. Earned media might be in the form of publishing an op-ed or a letter to the editor, and it can be just as effective if it's pushed out through a digital platform or more traditional media. We have been working with our partners at, I'm going to pick on an ASBC member, at Clean Canteen right now, and they've just written a dynamite op-ed on why clean water matters, both to business and to the country, and in particular why we should support the clean water rule that's currently being reviewed by the Trump administration. And that impact is tremendous, because not only is it a way to appeal directly to a policymaker, I guarantee you if you name check a member of Congress in your op-ed to your local paper, they get their morning clips every day and they want to see where they're being referenced, and it is a way to reach them. But it also has the value of reaching a whole broader network of people who might be totally uninitiated on an issue. So earned media, tremendous tool for getting your message to multiple targets at once. Then of course we have paid media. If you've got the funds, please, by all means, whether it's taking out advertisements or in print, on television, radio, what have you, if you can pay to transmit your message, I recommend it. You will reach more people and hopefully be working with the type of professionals who can help you place that message in the most effective way possible. And then I also want to mention the idea of using owned media, so your own internal channels, whether that's a blog post or a couple of really cool examples. Another ASBC member, Dr. Bronner's, the Awesome Soap Company based out of California, they have changed all of their labels for all of their soaps in all of their retail distribution places across the country in support of their efforts around raising minimum wage. So their label on their product is now intrinsically linked with their advocacy work. And it's certainly kind of an advanced form of advocacy. It's a pretty bold statement, but an amazing example of how you can think creatively to push an issue. And truthfully, how advocacy can also have a PR benefit for your brand. Another cool example of using owned media to support your advocacy efforts, our friends at Uncommon Goods recently, they've for some time now been supporters of paid family and medical leave, and they recently created a digital map on their website about all of the different paid leave campaigns in states across the country, as well as states where paid leave has gone into effect. Again, this has got the dual bonus of elevating the issue, showing their commitment for it, but also helps to brand them as a family-friendly company and shows their consumers what they stand for, while also driving new traffic to their site. So lots of ways to use media as a powerful advocacy tool. And again, often these are most powerful when used in concert with each other or some of the other tactics we talked about today. So 3 really key takeaways before I want to turn it over to you guys for questions. We talked today about lobby visits, how to set them up and how to make sure that they have an impact. We talked about this idea of partnering for impact with coalitions, validators, and grassroots support. And we talked about some outside-in strategies when you're not able to meet with or via surrogate actually meet directly with policymakers, but some of the tools that you can use to still communicate your ideas in a powerful way. But I think that the most important takeaway today that I hope will stay with you is that businesses have a voice, And they have the opportunity, and I will say also the responsibility, to use that to advocate for the issues that they care about. So with that, I'd like to turn over to you and take any questions.
So if anyone would wish to ask a question to Julia, please use the raise your hand feature in the software, or you can submit a question using the question feature, and we will answer them in the order they're received. All right, Roger, you should be unmuted if you want to ask your question. Roger LeBon. Are you there, Roger, or should I read it?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm on the phone.
Yep, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I went ahead and sent it. The reason I'm interested in this is I'm a physician that's interested in universal health care, and I'm an advocate for that. So my question is how to approach small business men to educate and advocate why they should be for a change in the policy for the benefit of their bottom line. I'm in the South, and it's very difficult.
Roger, we lost you there. I heard it's very difficult.
It's difficult in the area that I'm in the Southeast to get in to see businessmen because they tend to be very conservative and you know, are really it tied in with health insurance companies. And I've been trying to figure out ways how I can get in to talk to them.
Roger, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think if I hear your question correctly, you're interested in learning about how to connect, not necessarily with policymakers, but how to connect with businesses to help to convert them to be champions for an issue, and in this case, for single payer. This is a really interesting example because this is something that ASBC is also deeply interested in. This is the core of our work, organizing businesses and educating them so that either to empower them if they have a position on an issue, or if we think that they should be, for instance, with an issue like single payer, how do we organize them and then mobilize them for a deeper impact? So my honest answer is probably thinking from that coalition mentality and connecting with people like ASBC who work with businesses, whether that's a group like us that is primarily focused on advocacy, or getting in touch with businesses through other networks like trade associations or professional development groups. Finding somebody who can legitimize you and make that introduction, facilitate that meeting when you're trying to get in touch with businesses may be helpful rather than continuing to reach out to them if you found that to be somewhat difficult. The other thing I'll say, just very practically, if single-payer healthcare is an issue that you're interested in, ASBC has a group and a campaign right now that we are launching called Business Leaders Transforming Healthcare, and it is just what you're talking about. It's a conversation with businesses about why single-payer is the best way to fundamentally restructure and improve our healthcare system from a business perspective. So that's something that we can take offline if you want to discuss that more. But generally, I will say if you're trying to organize businesses for policy work, look to networks of businesses to be your go-between, and that should help soften the ground for you to make your case.
Next up, we have Patrick Hahn. Patrick, we'll unmute you if you'd like to ask your question.
Sure, thanks. My question is, which channel has been most effective in your experience in terms of reaching out to your elected officials? Because, you know, you hear you should call them, you should email them, you should tweet them. So I'm just kind of curious, especially guys, I know calling them is very effective, but if emailing and social media really does make a difference for these elected officials, if they actually do read them, yeah.
Oh, great question. So my honest answer is do all of the above. You know, the way to really get to people, they do count. The way to get to policymakers is volume. You know, just keep that steady drumbeat up. But I will say that from when I worked in the Senate for a senator who's no longer in office, phone calls were the most effective. That said, the structure of your basic congressional office is such that they have an entire team, from interns to front desk receptionists to a position called a legislative correspondent, and their entire job is to read, filter, and respond to constituent questions, concerns, or statements. So if you are tweeting at them, if you are writing them letters or submitting petitions, if you are calling them, every single touch that you make is getting logged in that office's internal database, and that message is getting passed up the chain to so if the legislative correspondent, for instance, is reading and reviewing your letter and possibly drafting your response, possibly not, their responsibility is to immediately take that to the subject matter expert in the office, the legislative assistant, and the legislative assistant will then run that up the chain to the member of Congress. It may not necessarily be that your letter directly gets read by the member, although it can. It just depends on the individual member. Some of them take it very seriously and do read constituent mail and look for a review or roundup at the end of the week. Others just look for the high notes from their staffers. It's purely a personal difference. But that message is getting relayed. So all of the above are powerful, but if you were asking me in the interest of using your time most effectively, what is the most powerful, pick up the phone and make a call.
Our next question comes from Pat Heffernan. Pat, your audio is live.
Good morning, good afternoon all. I'm wondering if ASBC has a list of issues for which there are tools and resources available to members, where you've done some background and have fact sheets or sample letters that a busy business owner could start with.
Great question. So the best resource for that is going to be just our website, asbccouncil.org. And if you go to the action section, you will have a full list of all of our active campaigns, where there is some sample background information on every issue, the target audience, so the key policymaker, and language or a way to engage with them directly, whether it's a letter or a petition. ASBC, as many of you may know, is a multi-issue organization. So while we have a lot of active campaigns right now, we also have other issues that we've worked on in the past and maybe working on in the future. So if there's a particular issue that you don't see in the Action Center and you'd like some resources to engage on, just reach out to us directly. There's contact information on the website, and we're happy to share with you any tools that we have available or general tools that could be applied to your work on an issue going forward. I'll also mention, beyond just the specific language for our active campaigns, if you're on the ASBC Council website, look at the resources section, and you'll find some more general info about how to contact policymakers and what that process looks like. We are also more than happy to send out the slides from today's presentation if some of these tips are helpful reminders as you're looking at connecting on policy issues in the future.
Our next question comes from Richard Lawton. Richard, your audio is on if you'd like to share your question. All right, I can go ahead and start reading it in that case. Richard asks, what's the process for submitting an op-ed to increase the chance of it being published?
Good question. So I will say two things. One, if you're writing an op-ed on your own, make sure that you're responding to something topical and timely. Speed is of the essence when you're trying to comment on a current issue. And if you're writing about something that is near and dear to your heart or your policy interests, but it's not necessarily in the news cycle right now, try and find a hook or a way to connect it to the events that everyone is talking about. So making something timely and as newsworthy as possible, even if it may be a more technical policy issue, putting it into current events will help you to find placement more easily. The second thing I'll say is, again, working with experts. So if you as a business leader, see something in your paper and want to respond to it, amazing. If you're having trouble getting something placed, work with your friends at ASBC. So, we have staff and resources and expertise on how to help get things placed, and that's something that we're always willing to do for our members. Another thing I'll say back to one of our earlier tips, if you are writing in response to a current event and talking about your policy issue of choice, that's great, but you will have more likelihood of being your response being placed if you are able to identify yourself as a business leader. That status really does have cachet, and especially if you're in a position to speak on behalf of your brand, and the letter is coming, or the op-ed rather, is coming from the perspective of the company, that will carry more weight most of the time than an individual writing just in their personal capacity. So just to summarize that, make it timely and tie it to current events, work with partners when needed, and speak from a business perspective whenever possible.
Our next question comes from Greg Hamra. Greg, your audio's on.
I didn't have a question. I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. We'll move on. Patrick Hahn, if you'd like to ask your second question, we've got your audio on now.
Great, thanks. I'm just curious if there was a precedent for businesses mobilizing their customers to contact their reps. I know nonprofits do this all the time, so I'm just curious if businesses have done that in your experience or in your network.
Yeah, good question. So the two examples I mentioned of Dr. Bronner's and Uncommon Goods mobilizing or using their owned media to share information about an issue, what they are doing with that is trying to mobilize consumers and mobilize their customer base. So yes, that does happen. That said, if we were to talk about businesses engaging in advocacy, I often think of it as sort of a continuum. There is a ladder of engagement that we talk about because it can be challenging for businesses to step into a policy space. Capacity is always an issue, and there can be trade-offs about coming on the record on a particular policy position. So not all companies are necessarily interested or willing to mobilize their customer base, even if they themselves are on the record about an issue. But I do think there are examples of companies who have tied their advocacy position to their brands intrinsically. Ben & Jerry's is another one that I think of that does amazing work about mobilizing their consumers through the use of their ice cream flavors, which who can't get behind an ice cream flavor, like empowerment, for instance. So some examples, but not as many as I would like to see, if I'm truthful. Good question, though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. With no further questions, we'll carry on and wrap up the presentation.
So thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, if there's one thing I hope you'll take away, it's that businesses have tremendous power to weigh in on policy conversations, and that the most effective way to do that is to take your story directly to your policymaker. But if that is something that you're interested in doing or in learning more about doing, please take note of the contact information on the screen. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation with folks. And also our Vice President of Public Policy, Rich Scheidlin, is a tremendous resource as well. So please stay in touch, and thank you again for your time today.